that accurately depict a world very similar to the world that we have today, even though these scriptures were written long ago? And do they predict the arrival of a messianic superhuman avatar figure who has 8 superhuman faculties and destroys the evil on earth, bringing us a new golden age of peace, prosperity, and ascension? These are the topics we're going to be discussing in today's exciting episode of Wisdom Teachings. Many ancient cultural traditions include this idea of some sort of period of great darkness and despair, which then leads into a sudden, amazing transfiguration of what it means to be human. And this is frequently called the Golden Age, although in later episodes we're going to discover that Golden Age has been misrepresented, and that in almost all of the Greek and Roman literature, it was actually Golden Race, not Golden Age, which lends a whole new interpretation to what actually happens to humans as we go through whatever this change is expected to be. One of the things that really comes clear as we get into this science of ancient scripture and prophetic tradition is that there are cycles built into the universe that are not just cycles in which a particular celestial event, such as a solar flash, happens at the end of a particular interval of time. Now, I do believe that that is true, but there is a much greater level of involvement in human destiny and consciousness with these cycles than most people could ever imagine possible. My take on cycle science has built up over many, many years. And ultimately, I believe that cycles are key to understanding the nature of the cosmos, the nature of the spiritual journey that we're all on, where it's taking us, and what it really ultimately means to be human. Many times on this show now, I've spoken about how the conventional view of the universe is a Big Bang, where some sort of nothingness explodes and turns into all the visible galaxies and stars and planets of the universe, essentially instantaneously. Whereas what we're now seeing is Nima Arkani Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka, 2 University of Caltech scientists, who have proven that the squiggles in the quantum level are all emanations off of a singular sacred geometric form. And it only takes a minor tweak to their model to see that that sacred geometry is a Merkaba. I've spoken about how the Hindu mandalas include this notion of the Star of David, which is the Merkaba. And this is the same Hindu culture that we were talking about, where they have Vimanas and they have reptilian beings. They knew the nature of the universe. So if the universe is fundamentally some kind of fractal hologram, then that would imply that our consciousness is built into that actual Merkaba that the whole universe emanates from in space and in time. Consciousness is the substrate. Consciousness is the building block of the universe. The universe is alive. The universe is intelligent. Biological life happens everywhere. That's why when you look at the line of sight between the Earth and the Sun, 99.9% of all that we see, according to Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickrama Singh, is bacteria, freeze-dried bacteria, because when you take bacteria and you freeze-dry them, they become 70%, and that is one of several key characteristics of the galactic dust that is exactly the same as bacteria. So suns are actually life factories. Suns are spewing off bacteria, which then freeze in the atmosphere of the solar system, wherever it is. And then when they get to planets that we now, NASA is telling us that there's 40 billion Earth-like worlds just in the Milky Way alone. That's a lot of Earth-like worlds, and if all stars are doing this, they're giving off bacteria, then that means those bacteria can hit a planet and complex life can form. And I do believe this is what's happening. I believe life is everywhere, and all of the insider data, as well as ancient prophecy traditions, suggest that there are incredible numbers of ancient civilizations and species of what in our galaxy at least would be human-looking beings with the star pattern, the head, 2 arms, 2 legs. That's everywhere. Intelligent civilizations are ubiquitous on these watery, Earth-like planets that they're now telling us are as common as all the grains of sand in the world. In fact, one of the estimates that they've now come out with from NASA is that there are in the universe literally as many Earth-like planets as if there was 100 Earth-like planets per grain of sand on Earth. That's unbelievable. That when you think about beaches and the vastness of them and you hold that sand and it runs through your fingers, that every grain is 100 planets like Earth. There's something going on with the universe that is so much more mysterious, and it kind of reminds me of what happened when you had Sir Edwin Hubble come out and we start learning about galaxies, because up until then we kind of knew there was a Milky Way galaxy because we had the thickness of stars in the sky, but we didn't really know that there were billions and billions of other galaxies. These Earth-like planets appear to be the rule. So is there some central design? Well, despite all those watery worlds, despite all those galaxies, the multitudes of pinwheeling ribbony nebula and colorful light and beautiful displays that we see as we're zooming through the universe and exploring countless worlds upon worlds upon worlds, all of that in the new physics is an emanation from a single geometric object, which just so happens to have been captured by the Hindus in their mandalas and by many other traditions as well. That implies that all of that stuff is an emanation of a single conscious awareness. And once you get to the idea that it is an awareness, the idea that the awareness itself is conscious becomes key. The awareness has an identity. The awareness is not just some thing that thinks but doesn't really have any purpose. There is absolutely a purpose. This is where we get into the idea of ageless wisdom or revealed teachings, where people such as the Buddhists come to an understanding that there is a greater identity that supersedes your human body. That greater identity is the cosmic I Am. It is the grand creator. And according to the Buddhist meditative practices, the key terms for this is empty awareness. It is an awareness that is vast, and it is also empty. So it is without form, it is without space, it is without time, and yet it is the author of all form, space, and time. And as I've talked about before, if you meditate on that empty awareness, you can become the awareness. Your physical mind merges with that cosmic presence, and then you no longer need to have a physical body, and you can the script for a normal human life as we see it today. There's some really amazing scripture in the Hindu texts that describe just that this is exactly who we are. And what I find so interesting about this is the idea that the universe designed a class for us, that we are going through a prolonged evolutionary curve. And that curve could be described as a series of events that we have to go through that are called archetypes. And each of these events are necessary stages of evolution in order to become ascended, in order to remember that we are the creator. So that set of archetypes was called by Joseph Campbell the hero's journey. And what's so interesting about this in Campbell's research is that the hero archetype shows up in so many different ancient mythological traditions around the world, or allegedly mythological, meaning that we have totally geographically isolated regions in which characters go through a set of story points that are exactly the same. And those happen to be the stories that keep getting told and survive the test of time. So part of the idea here is that there is something in our spiritual DNA, if you will. There is a blueprint. And what's so cool is that it appears there is a cosmic design of the 25,920 year cycle, where the Earth on a superficial level is the wobble of the axis, the precession of the equinoxes, meaning that where the sun rises at the equinox precedes or it moves all throughout a 360-degree arc. So the Earth wobbles on its axis, and that takes 25,920 years. And of course, this means that every 72 years, the positions of the stars in the night sky. Every 72 years, the positions of the stars in the night sky during the equinox will move by 1 degree. 1 degree every 72 years. Now what's interesting, we've talked about before, is this idea that the 25,920 years represents a sort of cosmic hero's journey or a cosmic lifetime for the planet. Because in these esoteric traditions, the planet itself is a consciousness and the planet is like a being. So if that's true, then when we go through a personal life, there is a holographic fractal connection to this greater planetary life of 25,920 years. And you remember what I talked about. The typical human lifespan would be 72 years, and then there's approximately 360 days in a year. 72 times 360 is 25,920 days in a human life, and 25,920 years in the precession of the equinoxes. Now, is that just a cool coincidence? I don't think so. I think this is actually the fractal nature of the cosmos, where these great cycles of a planet correspond to the cycles of a personal life. So the Hindu scripture has some really cool stuff about how during that 25,920 year cycle, there is a breakthrough, there is an all is lost point, there is a massive crisis right before the hero satisfies the quest, and you get this breakthrough into illumination. That breakthrough is what I would call the solar flash. That is the ascension. That is the moment where we vanquish whatever the villain is. We vanquish our own internal demons, because the villain is a fractal of our flaws if they were not contained. If they go out of control, the villain is basically a mirror of the hero's negative side. So on a planetary level, that's also happening. And these people that wrote the time that we're in right now is meant to be the collective dark night of the soul. It's meant to be the all is lost point. It's meant to be the worst that it gets. And this is written into the cycles of the universe, so that as our planet goes through this cycle, this comes about. So we get very clear references to this in the Hindu text. And they talk about it, in this case, as the Kali Yuga. So when we read these Kali Yuga prophecies, they are remarkably accurate as to what is happening now, even though this book was written so long ago. So I want to take you through them, because I think you're going to be pretty amazed. The specific reference that I'm going to be bringing you to is in Book 3 of the Mahabharata, called the Vanaparva, where they discuss what the conditions of the Kali Yuga are like. And this is in 3:187. Now, just a little background here. Brahmanas are religious people, so anytime there's a term like that you might not know, I'm just going to kick in a little extra explanation. Here we go. In the Kali age, the Brahmanas abstain from prayers and meditation. They're not doing spiritual work anymore, even though they say they are. The course of the world looks contrary, meaning very negative. Everything looks bad. And indeed, these are the signs that foreshadow the universal destruction. Whoa, hold on a second. The Hindu texts talk about this universal destruction, or the fire at the end of the age, and there are frequent references to the idea that the fire burns all things in a moment. In the next episode, I'm going to get into that. It's called Samvartaka fire. But understand that it's only for those who need that negative karma that they experience that physically. Everybody else gets whisked away, and this is how it works. This is why so many ETs have underground bases or off-world bases, because they don't want to be in the way of this solar flash when it happens. Unless you're ascending, in which case it's a very good thing, and I'm going to be showing you, go on, many prophetic examples saying that's what's going to happen to us. So the universal destruction just means the big defeat of the villain on earth. So think of it that way. Let's go on. And, O Lord of men, numerous Meleka kings then rule over the earth. And this is another funny term, because Meleka, if you think about the consonants in that word, it sounds like vomiting. So that's not by accident. And then they even say in some of the parts of the Vedas that the earth becomes Melekafied. They actually use that term, which is funny. So Meleka kings represent the most odious, corrupt governmental leaders. And remember, during the time that this book was written, they actually had really enlightened leadership in positive societies. They had people who were priest kings, where they were spiritual masters And that's what gave them the imprimatur to rule. Whereas now it's all about corruption and deceit, and that is very nicely described here. Let's go on. And those sinful monarchs, addicted to false speech, govern their subjects on principles that are false. And men become short-lived, weak in strength, energy, and prowess, and endued with small might and diminutive bodies, they become scarcely truthful in speech. And, O king, women then become mothers of numerous progeny, endued with low statures, and destitute of good behavior and good manners. And they do a lot of moral extemporizing on the state of women. We're not going to get into all that. Why did they say women are having multiple children? I think part of that is talking about that the earth becomes extremely populated. And I think it's also talking about the idea that in their culture, people only had maybe a couple of children. And so they're looking at what happens to India later on and this massive population boom that ends up happening. That the earth becomes extremely populated. And I think it's also talking about the idea that in their culture, people only had maybe a couple of children. And so they're looking at what happens to India later on and this massive population boom that ends up happening. Now let's continue. And people leading domestic lives, afraid of the burden of taxes, become deceivers, while Brahmanas, falsely assuming the garb of ascetics, meaning monks who renounce the world, that's what asceticism is, earn wealth by trade with nails and hair, unpaired and uncut. So again, ascetics are not supposed to make money in the Hindu tradition. They were into that whole impoverished monk idea. And they're describing now a world in which the spiritual people are not really spiritual, in which ordinary people are scamming, in which there is a problem with government, very corrupt leadership. But it gets even worse. Let's keep reading. At such period, the asylums of ascetics, that just means the ashrams, that kind of thing, the temples, become full of sinful and audacious wretches, ever applauding lives of dependence. He that becometh virtuous at such periods does not live long. Indeed, the earth becomes reft of virtue in every shape. So this is clearly something where, if you're looking at it from the perspective of what appear to be fourth density ascended beings that were in this Hindu culture back then, they're looking at what the earth is going to turn into, and they're just shaking their heads because we lose so much before the solar flash kicks us back into ascension again. Now let's continue. The merchants and traders, then full of guile, which means greed and cunning, sell large quantities of articles with false weights and measures, meaning they're overcharging too much money for what they sell. And they that are virtuous are not prosperous. People with virtue do not make money, while those who are sinful, and virtue loses her strength while sin becomes all-powerful. Many men at such periods strive to rob the wealth that was deposited with them from trust in secrecy. So bankers, this is what they're talking about now. And wedded to sinful practices, they shamelessly declare there is nothing in deposit. Well, doesn't this sound a lot like the too big to fail banks, right? They're supposedly holding on to our money. They blow all the money. Oh, well, we ran out of money. Well, what do you mean? You spent our money? Oh, well, we need a bailout. And then they spend $29 trillion, which is half of the world's gross domestic product, throwing money back into the banks who blew it all because they made such bad deals. And this is exactly predicted in the Hindu scriptures in Mahabharata, Book 3. It's amazing. Let's keep reading. And in their 16th year, men are overtaken with decrepitude and decay, and the period of life itself is soon outrun, meaning even by the time you're 16 years old, people are starting to degrade, they're starting to do alcohol, you're starting to get lines on your face, your health is starting to fall apart. That's what they were seeing for our time. Now let's continue. When the lives of men become so short, a drought occurs extending for many years. Now we're getting into earth changes. We're getting into something that starts to happen to the planet where there is a climate change, and that's exactly what we're seeing. The California drought went on for 7 years, and there's droughts all over the planet going on right now. So this, again, is very prophetic, and in traditions spiritually, like the Law of One, they explain that these earth changes are designed to happen in order to compel us into this global dark night of the soul. the rhythms of the planet don't work right. The seasons don't work right, and that leads to us looking for a greater, higher power, looking for answers, looking for how we can help, and that opens our heart, and that's part of the ascension process. The planet's problems wake you up. This lack of virtue, all these things that are upsetting, the fact that virtuous people are penniless and sinful people are wealthy, all of this is part of what opens up your spiritual awareness. And it's listed right here. A drought occurs for many years, and then this is metaphorical. Don't take this literally. 7 blazing suns appearing in the heavens drink up all the waters of the earth that are in rivers or seas. And then, O Bharata, the fire called Samvardhaka, impelled by the winds, appears on the earth that has already been dried to cinders by the 7 suns. So Samvardhaka fire, that's another mention of it. And what it's saying is that we go through this earth change, and again, the 7 suns to some degree is a measurement of the chakras, 7 chakras. And therefore, we're talking about the cosmic evolution. We're talking about that the planet goes through this on purpose so that when the solar flash occurs, Samvardhaka as they call it, those who are ready get propelled into the next level of spiritual evolution, and they're helped by a messianic avatar figure. This is really interesting, and that kickstarts what, according to a variety of esoteric scholars, including Blavatsky, and don't throw rocks at me, I know that some of her stuff is very strange, but the scholarship does suggest that the Kali Yuga changes into the Satya or Krita Yuga, and that is the golden age. That is the age of what happens after the sun does its flash. Let's hear a little bit about this now. 3:189. And when those terrible times will be over, the creation will begin anew. The clouds will commence its flash. Let's hear a little bit about this now. 3:189. And when those terrible times will be over, the creation will begin anew. The clouds will commence to shower seasonably, and the stars and stellar conjunctions will become auspicious. And the planets, duly revolving in their orbits, will become exceedingly propitious. In other Hindu scripture, which you're going to see in the next episode, they describe how the planetary orbits get out of whack, that the moon is not in the right season. That appears to be some kind of actual movement of the earth, like a pole shift. Might not be huge, but it's going to do something. In the law of one, they say 21 degrees. So that appears to be part of this process. And again, this is all part of the ascension process and the transfiguration that goes on earth, so that the negative folks get a cataclysm that they live through. Everybody else gets taken away from that, and you go through this really amazing graduation experience if you are ready for it. Let's continue. And all around there will be prosperity and abundance and health and peace. So this is part of what they prophesize, but then it gets really cool because they talk about the Kalki avatar. A Kalki avatar arrives with 8 superhuman faculties. And I'm going to read you now a part of the scripture that describes the coming of the Kalki avatar. Let's take a look. And commissioned by time, a Brahmana of the name of Kalki will take his birth. And he will glorify Vishnu and possess great energy, great intelligence, and great prowess. And vehicles and weapons, and warriors and arms, and coats of mail will be at his disposal as soon as he will think of them. So this is really cool, because what he's describing is that this avatar literally can manifest objects out of thin air. If he wants to be inside a spaceship, boom, there's a spaceship. If he wants to have a certain weapon, he's got it. If he needs a suit of armor, he's got it. Anything he thinks of, he just manifests spontaneously, and his job is to defeat the bad guys, as it says as we read on. And he will be the King of Kings and ever victorious with the strength of virtue, and he will restore order and peace in this world, crowded with its creatures and contradictory in its course. And that blazing Brahmana of mighty intellect, having appeared, will destroy all things. And by this they mean the negative aspects of this world. You got to understand the wording, and that the translations are a little bit funny. This is not some doom and gloom thing. They make that very clear. The world is transformed by this happening. Let's keep reading. and he will be the destroyer of all and will inaugurate a new yuga, a new cycle. And surrounded by the Brahmanas, that Brahmana will exterminate all the Malekas, wherever those low and despicable persons may take refuge. When the Brahmanas will have exterminated the thieves and robbers, there will now be prosperity everywhere on earth. That's hardly an earth where everything's been destroyed. It's just talking about the destruction of the negativity. Let's continue. And all seeds sown on earth will grow, meaning no more drought. And, O monarch, every type of crop will grow in every season. And men will devotedly practice charity and vows and observances, meaning deep spiritual practice. The Brahmanas, devoted to meditation and sacrifices, meaning personal sacrifice, will be a virtuous soul and always cheerful. And the rulers of the earth will govern their kingdoms virtuously. Well, wouldn't that be nice? We're definitely not there yet. This Krita Yuga thing has not yet happened, but I'm waiting to see how these prophecies actually unfold. Clearly, the Samvartika fire is a key part in that. Now, the next thing I want to do is zero in specifically on the 8 superhuman faculties, because it took me a long time to figure out what they were. And back when I first was doing research on this in 1999, there was almost nothing you could find online that would actually tell you what they were. But thankfully now, the internet has grown so much, I found it. So let's take a look. As I said, these 8 superhuman faculties were very hard to locate, and interestingly enough, one of the words that is used for them is vibhuti, and you've probably heard of that in terms of vibhuti ash, which is considered the sacred ash. So this is interesting because the sacred ash is meant to be a reflection of those superhuman abilities. And why do I think that's important? Because the Samvartika fire, the fire, they talk about it over and over again, in the aftermath of the sacred fire, there is ash. So the burning of the incense is equivalent to the fire that burns all at the end of the age, and there's so many references to that. The ash, the vibhuti ash, the incense ash smells good, and many of these monks will actually anoint themselves with the ash, and this also happens in Christian traditions as well with many of the saints. So the idea is that the ash symbolizes how the transfiguration occurs, how the physical body is literally transfigured to ash, and a golden body, a spiritual body, is what arises in the aftermath. Now check out this writing. What are the 8 faculties? And I found this on the virtual Maastricht McLuhan Institute website. And they start out the explanation by saying that the 8 faculties involve things like great power, might, dominion, supremacy, and dignity, superhuman power. And this is starting to kind of sound like the movie Ant-Man. In fact, what you'll find is that these superhuman faculties are just like what we'd think of as superhero abilities. There's no accident there. This is how it's designed. These ascended abilities, apparently people will show up, or we might get that when we ascend, and we know this is going to happen. We have it in our DNA, so Hollywood for years now has been just making the majority of all their tentpole films with the big budgets and all the CG and the action. It's all superhero, 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 because we're getting ready for this to happen. So anima, the ability to shrink yourself down, is one of them. If you can make yourself small, that means you can basically do anything. You have complete command over matter. Now let's see the next one. Extreme lightness, meaning you can change your weight. You could become so light that you could literally levitate. So levitation is included in this. The ability to walk on water like Jesus Christ is included in this. All that kind of stuff. Again, complete command over matter. What's number 3? The power to attain anything, or prapti. So we saw how the Kalki avatar can manifest anything he wants. He wants a weapon, whoosh, it just shows up in his hand. So this means spontaneous materialization. And that's one of the coolest abilities of all. You just think of something and you have it. You make it. You could make yourself look like anything you want. You could do so much just with number 3 alone. If I had to pick one of them, that would probably be the one I'd want. Anyway, let's see what number 4 is. Irresistible will, or prakamya. This kind of relates to the idea of the Jedi mind trick, the idea that your will, your telepathic ability is irresistible. People can hear what you say, and you essentially can, your will, your telepathic ability is irresistible. People can hear what you say, and you essentially can make sure that they're not going to do something they're not supposed to do. I talked about in the last episode that I had a dream about Krishna, and that the cobra around his neck would never bite him because he has that power to make it completely docile and non-aggressive. So please don't try that at home. Now, number 5. Limitless bulk or mahima. Now what this means is the same kind of idea where it's not just about weight, bulk is also size. So this means that if you wanted to, the Kalki avatar or any being, because they actually do say in the Hindu scriptures that he has a whole entourage of people with him that can do this, you could become a massive giant. You could become so big that you could just be kicking down buildings like Godzilla. And that apparently is all part of this. You have a complete command over material reality with your consciousness. That is an incredibly ascended being. And even, the things that Jesus was doing, we're now at a level even beyond that. And in John 14:12, Jesus said, "As I do these things, so shall ye do them, and greater things, for I go unto my Father." And again, I might be sounding like a cosmic preacher here, but I'm just doing cross-comparative religious analysis and showing that these 8 superhuman faculties actually are even more of a whiz-bang than what Jesus is reported to have done in the Bible. What's number 6? Let's keep going. Supreme dominion or Ishita. Now this is an interesting one because dominion can mean different things. So the idea here, I believe, is that it's talking about a spiritual sense of embodiment. Supreme dominion probably means the ability to command and control over the animals. You could rise a whole animal army of whatever you've got. And so that suggests, again, incredible telepathic ability, way beyond anything that you could ever imagine. Now for number 7. Subjugation by magic or Vashita. And again, these two kind of sound alike. Subjugation by magic seems to indicate that you have the control over your environment. So there's a little bit of crossover in some of these. But again, I think that some of that might be due to translation, and if you really dig into the etymology of these words, there might be a difference between supreme dominion, and this could mean some kind of just spiritual purity and sanctity, whereas the subjugation could be more of what I was describing. So we don't know exactly, but we're just making inferences based on the information that we do have. And finally, number 8, let's take a look. Number 8, Kama Vasayita, is the power to suppress all desire. So that's really important because with the power to suppress all desire comes the fact that you are not going to use these powers irresponsibly. You have the ability to be a true blessing for the world. You have the ability to use this talent, these superhuman faculties, for the healing of the planet. All right, that's all the time we have in this episode of Wisdom Teachings, bringing you the knowledge you need that will set you free. Thanks for watching.